Welcome, everybody, to the Nuggets of Gold podcast and YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about a few topics. First off, we're going to talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. and his torn meniscus and kind of the impacts of that industry. Then we're going to talk about some D.D. Westbrook rumors. And then finally, we're going to end off the episode talking about Richard Sherman and just, the fit in San Francisco and whether or not we're for or against it. I don't know how Aiden feels about it yet. I'm kind of up in the air, but we're going to make sure to finish off with that segment. So with that said, let's get started. Let's talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. He tore his meniscus, is expected to be out for 4 to 6 months. Not the most serious knee injury, but nevertheless, it's still a knee injury and a torn ligament in his knee. So first off, I want to say I feel terrible for Jeff Wilson Jr. Not only did he kind of end last season with definitely the best season of his NFL career, 10 touchdowns, and then, it looks like he's going to have a higher workload this year. Then the 49ers go out, draft 2 rookie running backs, sign Wayne Gallman in like the span of a week or so. And now he goes down with the torn meniscus. So I really feel for Jeff Wilson. I thought this was a year where he could produce a lot and maybe get a bigger deal somewhere else. I think that's a lot less likely, unfortunately, to him. But what are just your thoughts for Jeff Wilson himself?
Yeah, obviously wouldn't wish this upon anyone. Obviously do not want anyone to undergo a major knee injury like that. But I guess kind of in a 49er sense, it probably happened before the draft. I'm assuming Kyle and John knew about it, which is why they drafted 2 running backs and signed a guy like Wayne Gallman. And it's definitely stock up for Wayne Gallman and also JaMycal Hasty. I think both of those guys who were probably outside looking in to make the roster now have 2 guys fighting for 1 spot, at least until Jeff Wilson comes back. I think maybe Hasty makes the roster just because he can move down to the practice squad after Jeff Wilson comes back. But it could end up being great for the 49ers next year. Given that if Wilson isn't able to come back and isn't 100%, he'd be a great, cheap 3rd running back for next year even. So could end up being a positive for him. Just kind of hard to project right now, but he was primed for a big year, and definitely not something that you love to see.
Yeah, and especially I like that you bring up that he could be brought back for another year. And the way I kind of looked at it was oh man, he missed out on his final year of producing in San Francisco. But you bring that up. I mean, Mostert is not going to be on the team next year, most likely. At least his contract will be up. So you kind of start looking at it. Maybe there's a chance that he does come back. So maybe I'm off on that. But definitely something to bring up is that he could potentially come back for a lot cheaper deal. Unfortunately for him, it's much more likely to be a lot cheaper just because he's not going to have that production this year, or shouldn't expect to. Maybe he goes on a late season surge and kind of gets some excitement going. But what about for the rest of these running backs? How do you think it kind of affects them? I know you mentioned Hasty and Gallman that it helps their chances of making the roster, but what about the rookies? Do you think that this allows them to produce a lot more year one?
Yeah, I think Sermon and Wilson would have been kind of in that battle to be the between the tackles guy. Sermon pretty much locks that up. So I think maybe stock up for him as well. Don't really see it touching Mostert or Mitchell because, like we've talked about before, I think Shanahan has 2 separate models in his mind. But super interesting. And I mean, definitely helps the rookies get some more touches, but I don't think completely changes anything for the Niners offense.
Yeah, it's definitely not some move that's going to completely alter their season or hurt their season a lot. I think that for Sermon, I think that we should expect Sermon to see a lot more touches. I personally think that Sermon's going to end up leading the 49ers backs in touches, and we all know that could go about 4 different ways. I mean, who knows? Maybe Wayne Gallman will lead the team in touches. I hope that's not the case, but the way that we've seen in the past, so many guys can end up being there. 2019 had Coleman and Mostert there. I don't think it's really going to affect Mostert that much, and I don't think it's going to affect Mitchell that much either. I think that they're kind of, like you said, it's kind of like that mold of the smaller, faster running back, and then you have this other guy, a Tevin Coleman, a Jeff Wilson, that kind of mold. And that's where Sermon will play. I definitely think it helps his chances, and I think it makes it very likely that Wayne Gallman is on the roster. And you brought up that it could have happened before the draft. Do you think that that would be the reason of like why they bring in Wayne Gallman to specifically replace Jeff Wilson's role? Like that's the guy that they're like, all right, plug and play. You're the new Jeff Wilson in our depth chart, I guess.
I mean, I think that's definitely possible, but because he was signed before the draft, you obviously don't know who's gonna fall to you in the draft. I don't know how Shanahan approached his running back board, but I think Sermon was a guy that he really wanted. But I kind of took it more as Gallman as insurance if you're not able to get a guy like Sermon. I think that they do pretty similar things. They're both that between the tackles guy, but I mean, it's definitely possible that he makes the roster. I think it's gonna be him or Hasty, but I don't know. I feel like if Gallman makes the roster, it makes it harder to cut him in week 7 or 8 whenever Wilson comes back. When you could just keep Hasty on the practice squad. So, I mean, definitely could see that happen, but a lot of things up in the air right now. And he could be awesome during OTAs and training camp, and maybe Gallman beats out Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson sits out the whole year. I don't know. So many things to really see and see how they play in the offense before we really make any decisions like that.
So then for my final kind of question for you on this topic, what do you think the 49ers depth chart is going to stack up and look like come, let's say, not like their true depth chart of, who's out there at the first snap, but how are the touches going to look when we look back on the 21 season? What's like your projection for that? I'll go first with mine. I think Trey Sermon, like I said, I think he's going to get the most touches. I think Raheem Mostert should be expected to get the most touches after that. And then I put Elijah Mitchell and then Wayne Gallman after that, with kind of question marks around JaMychal Hasty and Jeff Wilson now, of course, just because with Hasty, we don't know if there's going to be a lot of improvement. If there's a lot of improvement, then he absolutely could push out Wayne Gallman for that roster spot. But we just don't know. Like, we got to see how training camp looks. We got to see what he looks like in the preseason. But what are your how do you break down that position?
I would agree with that. I think including catches in every single touch, I think Sermon will edge out Mostert, but I think it'll be pretty close. I think it'll be a 1A, 1B kind of thing. And then a distant third will be Mitchell. And then I think Hasty is going to end up making the roster. And honestly, I think Wilson might outtouch Hasty as that fourth guy when he comes back. Obviously, 4 to 6 months. It's hard to project right now, but it should be the first half of the season. So he should have most of the season. But I don't. If I had to put money down right now, I don't think Gallman makes the roster, but I obviously do not know enough to say that with certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is going to be figured out in camp, but I think that's going to do it for this kind of Jeff Wilson instant, impact of what this injury is going to really entail. But we're going to learn a lot more. Wouldn't be surprised. Maybe the injury did not happen before the draft and happened after, and maybe they sign another running back. We don't know. Definitely know that the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, they like to have a lot of running backs on the roster. And I think it makes sense. You're going to need guys to produce. You're going to need quality players out there. And with just how much running backs go down, it makes a lot of sense. And kind of good that they got an insurance policy like Wayne Gallman and then drafted 2 guys. Like, looking back on it now, it makes a lot more sense, especially when, your projected number 1 back before the draft is a guy that hasn't really been on the field much in Raheem Mostert, and then your number 2 guy is Jeff Wilson, who now is going down. So makes a lot more sense kind of looking back on it now, but I think that's going to do it for this segment.